She wore a simple grey dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap, looking at the mahogany table as if it were the most interesting thing in the room. To her husband Mark and his flashy mistress Jessica, her silence looked like defeat. It looked like weakness. They thought they had won before the judge even banged the gavel. Jessica actually laughed out loud, adjusting her diamond bracelet, a bracelet bought with money drained from the joint account. She doesn't even have a lawyer. Jessica sneered, her voice echoing in the sterile courtroom. She knows she's nothing without you, Mark. They were right about the silence, but they were wrong about the reason. She wasn't quiet because she was scared. She was quiet because she was waiting for the signal. And when the double doors at the back of the courtroom finally swung open, the blood would drain from Mark's face so fast he'd nearly faint. The air in the Superior Court of Manhattan was stale-smelling faintly of floor wax and old paper. It was a place where lives were usually dismantled with somber efficiency. But today, inside courtroom 4B, it felt more like a circus. Mark Sterling sat on the left side of the aisle, leaning back in his leather chair, with the arrogance of a man who had already mentally spent his winnings. He wore a bespoke navy suit, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, and he kept checking his Rolex Submariner, visibly bored. Beside him sat his attorney, a shark of a man named Richard Blackwood, who was currently shuffling papers with a predatory grin. But the real spectacle was the woman sitting directly behind Mark in the gallery, though she leaned forward so often she was practically at the counsel table. Jessica Vane. Jessica was beautiful in a sharp, artificial way. Platinum, blonde hair, styled in loose waves. Lips painted a crimson red that looked like a fresh wound, and an outfit that was entirely too loud for a divorce hearing. She wore a white designer blazer with nothing underneath but a lace camisole, treating the grim proceedings like a runway show. On the other side of the aisle sat Elena Sterling. In contrast to the chaotic energy radiating from Mark and Jessica, Eleanor was a statue. She sat alone at her table. No high-powered attorney whispered in her ear. No paralegals rushed around her with files. There was just Elena, a single notepad and a pen she hadn't touched yet. She looked tired, her brown hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a dress that looked like it had been bought off the rack at a department store 5 years ago. "Your Honor," Richard Blackwood boomed, standing up, as Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. "We are here today because Mrs. Sterling refuses to sign the settlement agreement. My client, Mr. Sewell, Sterling has been more than generous. He has offered her the Honda Civic and a lump sum of $10,000. Considering she has contributed 0 financial assets to the marriage in 5 years, we believe this is charity, not a settlement." Mark smirked, turning his head slightly to catch Jessica's eye. Jessica giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. The sound grated on the nerves of everyone in the room, except Mark. 10,000. Judge Harrison looked over his spectacles at Elena. "Mrs. Sterling, do you have legal representation present?" Elena looked up. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "I represent myself today, Your Honor." "She represents herself because she can't afford a lawyer," Jessica blurted out from the gallery, unable to help herself. "Order." Judge Harrison snapped his gavel, coming down with a sharp crack. "Ma'am, if you speak out of turn again, I will have the bailiff remove you. This is a court of law, not a cafeteria." Jessica rolled her eyes, sinking back into the bench, muttering loud enough for the front row to hear, "She's pathetic. Just take the money and go, Elena. You're embarrassing yourself." Mark leaned over to his lawyer. "Let's wrap this up, Richard. I have a tea time at the country club at 2. She's just stalling. She knows she has nowhere to go. Blackwood nodded and turned back to the judge. Your Honor, Mrs. Sterling has been a housewife for the entirety of the marriage. Mr. Sterling is the CEO of Sterling Tech Solutions. He built that company from the ground up. Every asset, the penthouse on Park Avenue, it's all the fruit of his labor. Mrs. Sterling merely existed in the space he provided. Is that so? The judge looked at Elena. Mrs. Sterling, do you contest this? Elena stood up slowly. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Mark. For the first time in months, their eyes locked. Mark expected to see tears. He expected to see the pleading look she used to give him when he came home late, smelling of Jessica's perfume. Instead, he saw nothing. A cold, terrifying void. I contest everything, Your Honor, Elena said, her voice soft but steady, including the claim that Mark built his company from the ground up. Mark laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, here we go. She's delusional. Judge, she thinks because she made me coffee in the mornings, she owns half my shares. I don't want half your shares, Mark, Eleanor said, still holding his gaze. I don't want the penthouse. I don't want the cars. Then what do you want? Blackwood interrupted aggressively. More money. Alimony. You want to bleed him dry because he found happiness with someone else. Elena finally shifted her gaze to Jessica. Jessica puffed out her chest, smiling smugly. I want, Elena said, the truth to be entered into the record. The tension in the room shifted, but only slightly. To Mark and Jessica, this was just the desperate rambling of a rejected woman. The truth, Jessica scoffed, ignoring the judge's earlier warning. The truth is, you were a boring, mousy little wife who couldn't keep her man. The truth is, Mark is a visionary, and you were just lucky he looked at you twice. Judge Harrison glared at Jessica, but didn't eject her yet. He seemed curious about where Elena was going with this. Proceed, Mrs. Sterling. What truth are you referring to? Elena opened her notepad. It was blank. She closed it again. Mark Sterling claims he started Sterling Tech Solutions 5 years ago using his own savings, Elena stated. He claims the initial seed money, $500,000, was an inheritance from a distant aunt. Because it was, Mark shouted, standing up. My Aunt Clara, God rest her soul. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the judge warned. Elena continued, unfazed. There was no Aunt Clara. The $500,000 came from a private investor who wished to remain anonymous at the time. That investor stipulated that the money was a loan convertible to equity if the company succeeded or repayable with interest if it failed. Blackwood waved his hand dismissively. This is fabrication, Your Honor. There is no record of any such investor. The company is solely in Mark's name. Exactly, Mark sneered. She's making things up. She's jealous because Jessica is pregnant and she never could give me a child. The room went dead silent. This was a low blow even for a divorce court. Elena had suffered 2 miscarriages during their marriage, traumas that Mark had dismissed as inconveniences. Jessica placed a hand on her stomach, beaming. That's right. We're having a son. An heir. Something a sterile nobody like you couldn't provide. So why don't you just sign the papers? Take your 10 grand and go back to wherever you came from. Probably a trailer park. Eleanor's face didn't twitch, but her knuckles turned white where she gripped the table. The investor, she continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steelier. "Never asked for the money back because the investor trusted Mark. The investor believed in him. The investor was his wife." Mark threw his head back and laughed so hard he nearly choked. You were the investor, Elena. You worked as a library assistant when we met. You wore thrift store clothes. You clipped coupons for groceries. You expect the court to believe you had $500,000 lying around. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Jessica chimed in, laughing along with him. "Look at her shoes, Mark. They're scuffed. She's practically a beggar." "Mrs. Sterling," Judge Harrison said, his tone gentle but skeptical. "These are serious claims. If you claim you provided the seed money, you need proof. Do you have bank statements? A contract?" "I have better than that," Elena said. She checked her wristwatch. It was a cheap plastic digital watch, the kind a child might wear. "He should be here in exactly 30 seconds. "Who?" Blackwood asked, annoyed. "We are not waiting for some imaginary witness." "He's not imaginary," Elena said. "And he's not just a witness." Mark leaned forward, his smile turning cruel. "Is it your dad? Did he finally get parole? Or maybe one of your loser brothers coming to beg for a job?" Elena looked at Mark with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You never did ask about my family, did you, Mark? In 5 years, you never once asked to meet them. You were so happy that I was low maintenance and detached that you never questioned why." "Because I didn't care," Mark spat. "I didn't care about your hillbilly family." "They aren't hillbillies," Elena whispered. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were practically thrown off their hinges. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It wasn't just a person entering, it was a force of nature. 3 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits walked in first security clearly, but looking more like Secret Service. They scanned the room, their earpieces coiled tight. Then they stepped aside. A man walked through the center. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Mark's entire company. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He carried himself with the terrifying calm of a man who owned skyscrapers and bought countries. He walked straight down the aisle, his Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked straight at Mark Sterling. Mark's arrogant smile faltered. He squinted. He recognized the face. Everyone recognized the face. It was on the cover of Forbes last month. It was on the news every time the stock market shifted. "Is that?" Jessica whispered, her hand freezing on her stomach. The man stopped at the gate behind the counsel tables. He slowly unbuttoned his jacket, revealing a silk vest. He turned his gaze to Elena. The hard, icy look in his eyes melted instantly into something warm and protective. "I apologize for the delay, Elle," the man said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "My helicopter had trouble finding a landing spot near this establishment." Elena nodded. "It's okay, Xander." Mark stood up, his legs shaking slightly. Alexander Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Global, one of the wealthiest men on the eastern seaboard, a man known in the business world as the Reaper for how ruthlessly he dismantled his enemies. Alexander Thorne turned slowly to face Mark. He didn't smile. He looked at Mark like he was a bug on the bottom of his shoe. "Miss Sterling," Alexander said coolly, "I understand you've been mocking my little sister's silence." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Sister, Mark whispered, his face draining of all color. Elena is your sister, Elena Thorne, Alexander corrected him. She dropped the name to find a man who loved her for her, not her money. It seems... Alexander glanced at Jessica, then back to Mark, his eyes narrowing. She failed miserably. The silence that followed Alexander Thorne's declaration was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. Mark Sterling blinked his brain, struggling to process the information. He looked at his wife, his quiet, unassuming wife in her simple grey dress, and then at the titan of industry, standing protectively beside her. That's impossible. Mark stammered, his voice cracking. He sounded like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test, not a CEO. Eleanor she's a nobody. She worked at a library. She told me her parents were dead. Our parents are dead, Alexander said, his voice devoid of emotion. They died when we were teenagers. I raised Eleanor, and I taught her that true character is found when you have nothing to offer someone. So she stripped herself of the Thorne name and the Thorne billions to see if a man would love her for her soul, not her inheritance. Alexander took a step closer to the railing looming over Mark. And for 5 years she played the role perfectly. She cooked your meals. She cleaned your house. She supported your dreams. And how did you repay her? By cheating on her with your secretary and trying to leave her destitute. Jessica, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly stood up. The panic in her eyes was quickly replaced by a frantic, irrational denial. "He's lying," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Alexander. "Mark, don't you see? She hired him. She hired an actor to come in here and scare us. Elena doesn't have a brother like that. Look at her dress. It's polyester." Richard Blackwood. Mark's lawyer was smarter than Jessica. He had gone pale. He recognized Alexander Thorne not just from magazines, but from legal circles. You didn't mess with the Thorne family. He began furiously packing his briefcase, his hands trembling. "Sit down, Jessica," Blackwood hissed. "That is Alexander Thorne. He is not an actor." "I don't care who he is," Jessica screamed, her composure shattering. "We have the leverage. Mark has the company. We have the baby. She has nothing." "Your Honor," Alexander said, ignoring Jessica completely and turning to Judge Harrison. "With your permission, I would like my counsel to join the proceedings. Since Mr. Sterling's lawyer was so eager to discuss finances, I believe it is time we discussed the true financials of Sterling Tech Solutions." Judge Harrison, who looked like he was witnessing the most interesting case of his career, nodded vigorously. Permission granted. The double doors opened again. This time it wasn't security. It was a phalanx of lawyers. 6 of them. They marched in formation, carrying thick leather binders. Leading them was a woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and glasses that looked like they could cut glass. Mark's lawyer, Blackwood, actually audibly gasped. "Sarah Vance," he whispered, "the Iron Lady." Sarah Vance was the most feared corporate litigator in New York. She didn't handle divorces. She handled hostile takeovers and billion-dollar mergers. The fact that she was here for a divorce hearing in a superior court was like bringing a nuclear warhead to a knife fight. Sarah walked past Mark without glancing at him, setting a heavy stack of files onto Elena's table. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," she said respectfully to Elena. "Good morning, Sarah," Elena replied softly. Mark felt the room spinning. "Elena, Honey. He tried a desperate, oily smile forming on his face. He stood up, ignoring his lawyer's tug on his sleeve. Look, things got out of hand. Maybe we should talk in private, just you and me. We don't need all these people. We were happy once, remember? Elena looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry. It was bored. We were never happy, Mark. You were happy. I was useful. I love you. Mark blurted out, the lie tasting like ash. Jessica meant nothing. It was a mistake. From the gallery, Jessica let out a strangled cry of betrayal. Mark, I'm carrying your son. Shut up! Mark roared at his pregnant mistress, sweating profusely now. Just shut up, Jessica. Can't you see what's happening? Yes. Alexander interrupted his voice, cutting through the chaos like a blade. We can all see what is happening. You are realizing that the golden parachute you thought you had is actually an anvil. Sarah Vance stood up, adjusting her glasses. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling's counsel stated earlier that his client built Sterling Tech Solutions from the ground up and owns 100% of the equity. We have evidence that proves this is factually incorrect. Objection, Blackwood squeaked, though his heart wasn't in it. My client is the sole proprietor. Actually, Sarah said, opening the first leather binder. Mr. Sterling is the managing director of a subsidiary. He owns exactly 0% of the parent company. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. Mark Sterling sank back into his chair, his legs giving out. What are you talking about? Mark whispered. I signed the incorporation papers. It's my name on the door. Let's revisit the seed money, Sarah Vance said, pulling out a document. It was yellowed slightly with age. 5 years ago, you received $500,000 from an entity known as Aurora Holdings. You believed this was a shell company for your late Aunt Clara's estate, a lie you told yourself and others so often you started to believe it. However, you signed a promissory note and an equity pledge agreement to secure that funding. Mark's eyes darted back and forth. He remembered signing a stack of papers Elena had brought him. She had said they were just tax forms and standard liability waivers for the inheritance transfer. He hadn't read them. He was too busy looking at Ferrari brochures. I signed standard forms, Mark argued weakly. You signed a complex venture capital agreement, Sarah corrected him. Clause 14, subsection B, referred to as the Fidelity Clause. Would you like me to read it, Mr. Sterling? Mark didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. Sarah read aloud, her voice crisp and clear. In the event that the managing director, Mark Sterling, engages in extramarital affairs, files for divorce against the primary beneficiary, Elena Thorne, or acts in a way that brings disrepute to the union, the loan provided by Aurora Holdings is immediately considered in default. She flipped the page. The sound was like a gunshot. Furthermore, upon default, all operational control, intellectual property, and physical assets of Sterling Tech Solutions revert immediately to the sole owner of Aurora Holdings. Sarah looked over her glasses at Mark. Do you know who owns Aurora Holdings? Mr. Sterling. Mark shook his head. Tears of panic welling in his eyes. Aurora is Elena's middle name, Alexander Thorne said from behind the railing. Mark looked at Elena. She was staring at the table, tracing the wood grain with her finger. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked resolved. So, Sarah Vance concluded. The penthouse you live in owned by the company. The Porsche you drove here. Leased by the company. The credit cards you and Ms. Vane have been using to fund your lifestyle corporate accounts. Sarah turned to the judge. Your Honor, since Mr. Sterling has admitted in open court to the affair, and Ms. Vane has kindly confirmed it, the fidelity clause is triggered. As of this moment, Mark Sterling is not the CEO of Sterling Tech. He is an unemployed trespasser on Thorne family property. He has no assets to settle. He has no money to offer. In fact, according to the clawback provision in the contract, he owes the company for every dollar of unauthorized personal spending over the last 5 years. How much? Blackwood asked, his head in his hands. Roughly $3 million, Sarah said calmly. Plus interest. Jessica screamed. It was a high, piercing sound of pure horror. $3 million. He's broke. He's in debt. She scrambled over the railing, ignoring the bailiff, and grabbed Mark by the lapels of his expensive suit. You told me you were rich. You told me she was the leech. You lied to me. Get off me. Mark shoved her away, his face purple with rage and humiliation. You think I knew? She tricked me. She set me up. He turned to Elena, his eyes wild. You planned this. You planned this whole thing from the beginning. You knew I would fail. Elena finally stood up again. She walked slowly toward the railing, stopping just inches from where Mark was hyperventilating. I didn't plan for you to fail, Mark, she said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. I planned for you to succeed. I gave you the money. I gave you the connections. Did you really think those big contracts just fell into your lap? I made calls. I had Alexander pull strings behind the scenes. I built that company for you because I loved you. She took a deep breath. The contract was just insurance. My father insisted on it. I told him I would never need it because you were a good man. She looked at Jessica, then back to Mark. I kept that contract in a safe for 5 years, praying I would never have to use it. I didn't set a trap, Mark. You built the trap yourself, brick by brick, every time you lied to me, every time you came home smelling like her, every time you mocked me for being simple while spending my money. Eleanor, please. Mark dropped to his knees. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic groveling. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as the man who had walked in like a king now knelt on the dirty floor. Please, I can change. We can fix this. Think of the baby. Wait, no, forget the baby. I'll leave her. I'll leave Jessica. Just don't take the company. It's my life. It's not your life, Alexander said, stepping up beside his sister. It's my sister's hobby, and she's bored of it. Alexander signaled to the back of the room. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by a man in a forensic accountant's suit. What is this? Blackwood asked, standing up. What is happening now? That was the civil matter, Alexander said, checking his watch. Now we move to the criminal matter. Mark's head snapped up. Criminal? Embezzlement, Sarah Vance stated. Using corporate funds for personal luxury goods like diamond bracelets for mistresses without board approval is grand larceny. Since you are not the owner, you were stealing from the company. We filed the charges this morning. The officers moved toward Mark. He scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. No, you can't. Elena, tell them to stop. We're married. Not for long, Elena said, turning her back on him. As the officers grabbed Mark's arms, Jessica tried to slink away toward the exit. Ms. Vane, Sarah Vance called out. Jessica froze her hand on the doorknob. I wouldn't leave just yet, Sarah said pleasantly. You are wearing a Cartier bracelet, valued at $25,000. That is stolen property belonging to Sterling Tech Solutions, Unless you want to be charged as an accessory to grand larceny, I suggest you hand it over, along with the earrings and the handbag. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B had shifted from a legal proceeding to a public dismantling. The air was thick with the smell of fear, specifically Mark and Jessica's fear. Jessica Vane stood by the heavy oak doors, her hand clutching the strap of her white Hermes Birkin bag so tightly her knuckles were yellow. Sarah Vance, the Iron Lady of corporate law, stood before her with an outstretched hand, looking like a teacher waiting for a confiscated toy. "The bag, Ms. Vane," Sarah repeated, her voice dangerously polite. "It was purchased on October 14th, using the Sterling Tech corporate Amex. We have the receipt. It cost $18,000. Hand it over." Jessica looked around the room for help. She looked at the bailiff, who crossed his arms. She looked at the judge, who was busy writing notes, pointedly ignoring her. Finally, she looked at Mark, who was currently being patted down by the police officers near the defendant's table. "Mark!" Jessica screeched, her voice cracking. "Do something, they're taking my things." Mark twisted in the grip of the officer. "Jessica, shut up. I'm being arrested. Do you understand? I'm going to jail." "I don't care about you," Jessica yelled back, the mask of the loving mistress completely falling away. "I care about me. I'm pregnant. I can't go home without a car or a phone. You said you'd take care of me." "I can't take care of you," Mark roared, his face pressed against the table as the officer clicked the first cuff onto his wrist. "I have nothing." "She took everything. It's all gone." Jessica let out a sob of pure rage. With shaking hands, she unclasped the diamond bracelet. She threw it at Sarah Vance. It hit Sarah's chest and fell to the floor. "Pick it up," Sarah said. She didn't move. Her voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze water. "Pick it up and place it in the evidence bag, or I will have the officers add destruction of evidence to your list of worries." Trembling, humiliated, and weeping, black mascara tears, Jessica Vane knelt on the courtroom floor. She crawled forward, picked up the bracelet, and dropped it into the plastic bag Sarah held open. Then came the earrings. Then, with her agonized wail, she handed over the Birkin bag. She was left standing in her lace camisole and blazer, clutching her stomach, stripped of every symbol of status she had used to mock Elena just 20 minutes earlier. "And the phone," Sarah added. "No," Jessica gasped. "It's my phone. iPhone 15 Pro Max 1TB, titanium blue, purchased on the company account," Sarah recited from memory. "Hand it over. We need to recover the deleted text messages between you and Mr. Sterling regarding the hiding of assets anyway." Jessica surrendered the phone. She looked small, cheap, and utterly defeated. Meanwhile, Mark was being hoisted to his feet. The reality of his situation was finally piercing through his narcissism. He looked at Alexander Thorne, who was watching the scene with the dispassionate interest of a man watching a demolition derby. "Alexander." Mark pleaded, the handcuffs cutting into his wrists. "Mr. Thorne, please, look strictly man to man. I built that company. Even if it was your money I put in the hours, you can't just destroy me like this. I'm family." Alexander laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Family. You spent 5 years isolating my sister. You made her feel small so you could feel big. You aren't family, Mark. You're a bad investment. And at Thorne Global, we liquidate bad investments." Mark turned to Elena. She was standing now, gathering her notepad. She looked calm, cleaner, lighter than she had in years. "Elena," Mark shouted as the officers began to drag him toward the side door, leading to the holding cells. "Elena, tell them I'm your husband. You can't let the father of your... You can't let your husband go to prison." Elena looked up. She walked over to him, signaling the officers to pause for a second. Mark's eyes lit up with hope. He thought, "She's weak. She still loves me. She'll save me." Elena leaned in close. "You asked me earlier what I wanted, Mark. You asked if I wanted alimony." Yes. "Take the alimony. Just drop the charges," Mark begged. "I don't want alimony." Elena whispered, her voice clear enough for Jessica to hear from the back of the room. "I want you to remember this moment. Every time you sit in that cell. Every time you eat prison food. Every time you realize you're nothing. I want you to remember that you did this to yourself. I was the best thing that ever happened to you, and you threw me away like trash." She pulled back, her eyes hard. "Officer, get him out of my sight." "You bitch!" Mark screamed, struggling violently as they dragged him through the door. "You planned this. I'll kill you. I'll sue you. I'll..." The heavy metal door slammed shut, cutting off his threats. The silence returned to the courtroom. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. He looked at the empty defendant's chair, then at the weeping Mistress, and finally at Eleanor. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said respectfully. "Or should I say, Ms. Thorne. In light of the evidence presented regarding the fraud and the nullification of the prenuptial agreements via the fidelity clause, I am granting the divorce effective immediately. I am also signing the restraining orders requested by Mr. Thorne's legal team against both Mr. Sterling and Miss Vane." He banged the gavel. "Case closed." Jessica stood there shivering. She looked at Elena. "How am I supposed to get home?" she whispered. "He drove us. You took my phone. I don't have any money." Elena picked up her simple purse. She didn't look at Jessica with hate. She looked at her with pity. She reached into her purse and pulled out a metro card, a subway pass. She walked over and pressed it into Jessica's hand. "The Q train stops 2 blocks from here," Elena said. "It'll take you back to Queens. I suggest you start getting used to public transport, Jessica. It's a long way back to the top." Elena turned and walked down the aisle, flanked by her billionaire brother and the most powerful lawyer in New York, leaving the Mistress standing alone in the middle of the courtroom, holding a plastic subway card. The exit from the courthouse was a scene of orchestrated chaos. Usually, divorce hearings for mid-level tech CEOs didn't attract press. But Alexander Thorne's helicopter landing on a nearby helipad had tipped off every news desk in Manhattan. By the time Elena and Alexander walked out the front steps of 100 Center Street, a sea of cameras and microphones was waiting. "Mr. Thorne, is it true? Who is the woman? Is that your sister? Did Mark Sterling really get arrested for embezzlement?" Alexander put a protective arm around Elena's shoulders. He didn't stop to answer questions. His security team parted the sea of reporters like a bulldozer. They guided Elena into the back of a waiting black-armored SUV that looked like a tank dressed up as a Cadillac. Inside, the noise of the city vanished, replaced by the soft hum of the engine and the smell of expensive leather. Elena let out a long, shuddering breath. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. For 5 years, she had held her breath. For 5 years, she had played the role of the supportive, submissive wife, while her husband whittled away her self-esteem. "Are you okay?" Alexander asked, opening a chilled bottle of water and handing it to her. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I feel mean. Was it too much taking the bracelet?" The arrest? Alexander looked at her seriously. He stole $3 million. He wasn't just cheating on you sexually. He was cheating you financially. He was using your money. Money Mum and Dad left for you to buy a life for another woman. That isn't being mean. That's justice. You didn't ruin his life. You just turned the lights on. Elena took a sip of water. She looked out the tinted window as the city blurred by. What happens to him now? Sarah says the DA is looking at 5 to 10 years, Alexander said nonchalantly, checking his phone. He'll probably take a plea deal for 3, but his reputation is dead. Sterling Tech is already being dissolved and absorbed into Thorn Global. We're liquidating the assets to pay back the loan. By the time he gets out, he'll be 40 years old, with a felony record and millions in debt. And Jessica. Sarah did a little digging while we were in there, Alexander said. Turns out Jessica isn't pregnant. Eleanor sat up straight. What? It was a ruse, Alexander said. She was trying to lock Mark down because her own credit cards were maxed out. She bought a fake ultrasound online. We found the search history on the phone she handed over. Mark left you for a phantom baby and a gold digger who was deeper in debt than he was. Elena started to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a full belly-shaking laugh that brought tears to her eyes. It was the absurdity of it all. Mark had destroyed his perfect life, his career, and his marriage for a lie. He really is an idiot. Elena wiped her eyes. The biggest... Alexander agreed, a small smile playing on his lips. Now enough about them. They are the past. We have to discuss your future. My future, yes. Dad's seat on the board of directors has been empty for a long time, Alexander said. I've been holding it for you. You're smart, Elena. You ran the logistics for Mark's company from the shadows for years. You know the business better than he ever did. It's time you took your name back. It's time Elena Thorne came home. Elena looked at her reflection in the window. She didn't see the tired housewife anymore. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding the match. I'd like that, she said softly. 3 days later. The story was everywhere. Variety ran the headline, "The Billionaire's Sister, How Elena Thorne Toppled a Fake Tech Empire." The New York Post was less subtle. Sterling silver, no just steel bars. CEO arrested in courtroom shocker. A video from inside the courthouse hallway, leaked by a bystander, went viral on TikTok. It showed Mark Sterling being led away in handcuffs, weeping while Jessica Vane sat on a bench in the background, looking at a subway map with a confused, terrified expression. The comments were brutal. Karma doesn't miss. Imagine leaving a Thorne for a fake pregnancy, L of the century. The wife is a queen. The silence was the loudest part. Elena sat on the balcony of her new apartment, a real one overlooking Central Park, not the sterile penthouse Mark had pretended to own. She was drinking tea. Her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. A call from a correctional facility. This is a collect call from an inmate at Rikers Island Correctional Center. Press 1 to accept. Mark. He was using his one phone call to try and reach her. He probably wanted to beg. He probably wanted to blame her. He probably wanted to ask if she could post his bail. Elena looked at the phone. She thought about the 5 years of dinners he missed, the birthdays he forgot, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't smart enough to understand his business. She pressed the button on the side of her phone. Decline. Then she blocked the number. She set the phone down, picked up her tea, and watched the sun rise over the city that was finally, truly hers. 5 years is a long time. In the world of technology, it is an eternity. Companies rise, empires fall, and billionaires are minted overnight. But inside the grey concrete walls of Collins Correctional Facility, time didn't move fast. It dragged, it scraped, it eroded a man until there was nothing left but the raw nerves of regret. When the heavy steel gates finally buzzed open on a rainy Tuesday in November, Mark Sterling didn't walk out with a strut. He shuffled. He was 42 years old, but he looked 60. The thick, lustrous hair that had once been his pride was now thinning, wispy, and prematurely white. His skin, once tanned from weekends on yachts he didn't own, was pasty and lined with deep crevices of stress. He wore a suit the state had given him a polyester blend that was 2 sizes too big, smelling faintly of mothballs and other men's sweat. He had $38 in his pocket and a plastic bag containing his release papers. Mark boarded the bus to the city, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. He watched the skyline of Manhattan approach. It used to look like a playground to him. Now, it looked like a fortress he had been exiled from. His first week of freedom was a lesson in humiliation. He was staying in a halfway house in the Bronx, a cramped room he shared with a man who screamed in his sleep. Every morning, Mark woke up, put on his ill-fitting suit, and went to hunt for work. He thought naively that his skills would save him. He was a businessman. He knew how to talk. He knew numbers. Surely someone would overlook the felony conviction for a man with his experience. He was wrong. Mr. Sterling, a hiring manager at a small logistics firm, said, looking at Mark's resume and then up at Mark's face. The man's expression shifted from boredom to recognition. Wait, the Mark Sterling. The silence mocked guy. Mark flinched. That was what they called him online. The video of his arrest had 40 million views. He was a meme, a punchline. I have paid my debt to society. Mark stammered, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. I just need a chance. I can increase your operational efficiency by 20% in a month. The manager laughed, closing the folder. Buddy, I wouldn't trust you to manage a lemonade stand. You stole from the Thorns. You're radioactive. If I hired you, we'd lose half our contracts by noon. Get out. This scene repeated itself 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. By the 3rd week, Mark wasn't looking for management roles. He wasn't looking for sales roles. He was looking for anything that would pay for a meal that wasn't instant noodles. The rain was pouring harder when he arrived at Staff Pro, a bottom-barrel temp agency located above a pawn shop in Queens. The neon sign flickered ominously. Day labor, cash daily. Mark shook off his umbrella, a broken one he'd found in a trash can, and walked up the stairs. The waiting room was filled with people who had run out of options. The air smelled of wet wool and hopelessness. Mark took a ticket from the dispenser. Number 402. He scanned the room for an empty plastic chair. Most were taken. As he moved toward the back, his eyes snagged on a woman sitting near the water cooler. She was hunched over, scrolling frantically through a cracked smartphone. She wore a coat that had once been expensive, a camel trench coat, but it was stained now, the hem unraveling. Her shoes were cheap knockoffs, scuffed at the toes. Her hair, which Mark remembered as a blinding platinum blonde, was now a brittle chemical yellow, grown out to reveal 3 inches of dark, greasy roots. Mark stopped. His heart hammered against his ribs. not with love, but with a sickening jolt of recognition. "Jessica." The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were sunken, surrounded by dark circles that no amount of drugstore concealer could hide. Her face had lost its soft, pampered fullness. She looked gaunt, sharp, and angry. She stared at him for a long moment, squinting as if trying to focus through a fog. Then her lip curled. "Mark." Her voice was raspy, stripped of the girlish lilt she used to affect. "My God, you look like a corpse." Mark sank into the chair opposite her. The irony was so thick it choked him. The last time they were in a room together, they were plotting to spend millions of dollars laughing at his wife's simple clothes. Now they were two felons in a temp agency, wearing the rags of their former arrogance. "I just got out," Mark said, his voice hollow. "Good for you," Jessica spat, turning back to her phone. "I've been out here eating dirt for 4 years. Do you know what it's like to have your face plastered on the internet as the gold digger who failed? I couldn't get a job at a makeup counter. I couldn't get a job as a waitress. I had to change my name, Mark. I go by Jen now. And even then I'm barely scraping by." "We both lost everything," Mark whispered. "No," Jessica hissed, leaning forward, her eyes flashing with venom. "I lost everything because of you. You told me you were the genius. You told me you owned the company. If you hadn't lied to me, I never would have mocked her. I would have kept my mouth shut. And if you hadn't been so greedy," Mark shot back, a spark of his old anger flaring up, "maybe I wouldn't have tried to embezzle $3 million to buy you shiny things. You drained me, Jessica. You were a parasite. And you were a host with no blood," she shouted. The room went silent. Everyone was staring. The receptionist behind the glass partition banged her fist on the counter. "Hey, you two keep it down or get out. Get out." Jessica slumped back in her chair, crossing her arms. She looked small and defeated. "Whatever, it doesn't matter. We're both nothing now." "Number 402, the receptionist called out. Mark stood up. He looked at Jessica one last time. He wanted to feel superior, but he couldn't. He just felt tired. "Goodbye, Jessica." She didn't look up. "Go to hell, Mark." Mark walked to the counter. The woman behind the desk, a no-nonsense matron named Brenda, looked at his application. "Mark Sterling," she read. She didn't recognize the name. To her, he was just another desperate body. "I have one opening tonight. It's hard labor. Night shift cleaning crew for a corporate high-rise in Manhattan. You scrub floors, you empty executive trash, you scrub toilets. It pays minimum wage. You take it or you leave it." Mark closed his eyes. He thought about the penthouse, the Rolex, the Italian suits. Then he opened his eyes and saw the hole in his shoe. "I'll take it," he said. The building was a monolith of glass and steel located on the West Side Highway. It pierced the clouds, a testament to unimaginable wealth and power. Mark arrived at the service entrance at 9:00 p.m. He was given a grey jumpsuit with the name Clanco stitched on the pocket. It scratched his skin. His supervisor, a massive man named Tony, who smelled of cigarettes and bleach, handed him a heavy ring of keys and a mop bucket. "You're on the executive level tonight," Tony grunted. "Top 3 floors. The regular guy called in sick. Listen to me closely, new guy. These people are the elite. They don't want to see you. They don't want to smell you. If you see a suit, you look at the floor. You clean the mess and you get out. Do not touch anything on the desks. Understand?" "I understand," Mark said softly. He took the service elevator up. The numbers climbed. 20, 30, 40. 50. When the doors opened on the 52nd floor, the air changed. It was cool, crisp, and smelled of expensive white tea and leather. The carpet was so plush the wheels of his cleaning cart sank into it. Mark began his work. He vacuumed the hallways. He polished the brass handles. He moved with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had turned off his brain to survive. He reached the end of the hall, the double doors to the CEO's suite. They were mahogany, towering and intimidating. Mark swiped his keycard. The light turned green. He pushed the doors open and wheeled his cart inside. The office was a cathedral of commerce. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New York City, a view Mark used to think he was entitled to. The city lights twinkled below like diamonds indifferent to his fall. Mark moved to the massive desk in the center of the room. It was made of reclaimed black walnut. He picked up the wastebasket to empty it. As he did, his gaze fell upon the objects on the desk. There was a sleek, modern nameplate. Eleanor Thorne, CEO. Mark froze. The breath left his lungs in a rush. He knew Eleanor had taken over. He knew she was successful. But reading the name here, in this sanctum of power, hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the framed photos lined up meticulously. The first photo showed Eleanor accepting an award in Tokyo, shaking hands with the Prime Minister. She looked regal. The second photo was of Elena and Alexander laughing on the deck of a sailboat. They looked free. They looked unburdened. The third photo. Mark leaned in his hands, trembling so hard he nearly dropped the trash can. The third photo was of a new family. Elena holding a baby boy with bright blue eyes. Beside her stood a man, tall, kind-faced, with the rugged look of an architect or an artist. His arm was around her waist, and Elena was looking at him with a gaze of pure, unadulterated adoration. It was a look Mark had never received. Not once. She had moved on, completely. She hadn't just survived him. She had erased him. Mark felt tears prick his eyes. Hot, shameful tears. He had thrown this woman away for a fake pregnancy and a woman who was now arguing with receptionists in a temp agency. "You missed a spot." The voice came from the shadows near the door. Deep, resonant, terrifying. Mark gasped, spinning around. He dropped the wastebasket, spilling crumpled papers onto the pristine carpet. Standing in the doorway was Alexander Thorne. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo this time. He was wearing a simple black turtleneck and slacks, leaning against the doorframe with a casual, predatory grace. He held a tumbler of whiskey in one hand. He had been watching Mark for minutes. Mr. Thorne," Mark choked out. He instinctively stepped back, cowering. Alexander took a slow sip of his drink. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He walked into the room, ignoring Mark, and went to the bookshelf. He adjusted a trophy slightly to the left. "I saw the roster," Alexander set his back to Mark. "I saw the name M. Sterling on the cleaning list. I told security to let you through. I was curious." Alexander turned around. His cold blue eyes bored into Mark's soul. "I wanted to see if prison had changed you, or if you were still the same arrogant little man who thought he could steal from my sister." "I have nothing," Mark whispered, spreading his arms in the grey jumpsuit. "I'm cleaning floors, Alexander. Is this not enough? Are you not satisfied?" Alexander chuckled darkly. He walked over to the desk, Elena's desk, and picked up a paperweight. "Satisfied, Mark. I don't care enough about you to be satisfied. You are a bug on the windshield of this company. We wiped you off and we kept driving." Alexander gestured to the floor, where Mark had spilled the trash. "Elena will be here at 7:00 a.m., Alexander said. "She's meeting with investors from Dubai. She likes her office spotless." Mark looked at the trash. Then he looked at Alexander. "Please," Mark begged, his voice cracking. "Don't tell her I was here. Just fire me. Let me go. I can't face her. Not like this." Alexander's expression hardened. The amusement vanished, replaced by steel. "You think she cares?" Alexander asked. "You think she would even recognize you to her? You're just the help, Mark. You're the ghost of a mistake she made in her 20s. Alexander set his glass down. "You wanted to be part of this company, Mark. You wanted to be in the executive suite. Well, here you are. You have full access." He pointed a finger at the mess on the floor. "Clean it up." Alexander turned and walked out of the office, not looking back. "And Mark, make sure you polish the door handle on your way out. It was looking a little dull." The door clicked shut. Mark Sterling was left alone in the silent, expansive office. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar in his ears. He looked at the photo of Elena and her new husband. He looked at the city lights. Slowly, painfully, Mark dropped to his knees. He reached out with his rough, calloused hands and began to pick up the trash piece by piece. He picked up a crumpled memo, a discarded sticky note, an empty coffee cup. He placed them into the bag. Then he grabbed his mop. He dipped it into the grey water and began to scrub the floor of the empire he had tried to steal. The rhythm took over. Left, right. Left, right. Tears dripped from his nose, mixing with the soapy water on the floor, instantly wiped away by the mop. There was no redemption here. There was no hero's journey. There was only the cold, hard truth of karma. He had silenced his wife to make himself feel big. Now the silence of her office was swallowing him whole. Mark Sterling scrubbed until the floor shone like a mirror, reflecting the hollow shell of the man he had become. And that is the story of how Mark Sterling and Jessica Vane learned the hardest lesson of their lives. Never mistake strength for weakness. Elena didn't just win. She destroyed them without ever raising her voice, proving that the best revenge isn't screaming, it's succeeding while your enemies watch from the sidelines. Mark ended up cleaning the very floors he used to walk on, and Jessica was left with nothing but a fake reputation and a subway card. What would you have done if you were Elena? Would you have let Mark rot in jail, or would you have shown mercy? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of brutal karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a wild, wild west revenge coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.